Nataka watu wachache as possible. Kuna 24. Michelle, anza.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to IEA's 6th webinar. We are glad that you're able to join us this morning on short notice. My name is Jacqueline Kagume and I work at the IEA as a program officer. The IEA is a public policy think tank and our mission is to inform decision making through policy in Kenya through policy innovation, research and dialogues. the overall vision of the institution is to have a well-managed economy that upholds constitutional principles of governance. So in line with our mission and our vision, we work across 5 main program areas, being PFM, trade and development, futures and foresight, and then the last is regulation and competition, economic regulation and competition policy. So today we are here on the invite of the Law and Economy program, and the main our topic of discussion this morning is on looking at. I think we are all aware of the BBI process that has been ongoing, and as a result of that, we have the Constitution of Kenya Amendment Bill that has most of us have either interacted with or have had discussions around. So we put together a meeting to be able to have this discussion, to share some facts, what we think are some important facts. As IEA, we feel that some of the discussion that has been in the media or some of the public debate has not been informed by facts, and in line with our mission to use evidence to inform decision making, we thought it would be critical to just share what we feel are actual facts and then lead to the public to be able to make informed decisions when, if required, and when the time comes. So what we've done as the CLE program at IEA is to look at the Constitution of Kenya Amendment Bill, do an analysis of the entire bill. It proposes various amendments to the Constitution. As you're aware, the Constitution is arranged in 18 chapters, beginning with Chapter 1 on sovereignty, all the way to Chapter 18, which is on transitional and consequential provisions. I know many people interact with the Constitution only until Chapter 15, which is on commissions and independent offices, but we do have 3 other chapters actually after, which is the first on amendment of the Constitution, that's 16, then general provisions, and the last is Chapter 18. So what we've done is to undertake an analysis of the bill, because the bill proposes amendments to various chapters within the Constitution, so all across the 18 chapters. So we've done a chapter by chapter review of what those amendments are, what are the economic implications for the various chapters. If, for instance, we have proposals regarding either extending the or expanding the mandate of an institution, or so what does that mean? Does that mean any additional cost implications? I know Kenyans are keen to hear that, because most of the debate that we hear is that maybe it might mean an increase on the wage bill, or extended or increased pressure on the mwananchi. So we've done a chapter by chapter review, but what we maybe I should also state here before we begin is that looking at the bill itself, the main objective of the bill, the Constitution of Kenya Amendment Bill, we are all aware that it was born out of the BBI process, where all Kenyans were most Kenyans, rather, there was a national discussion, and most Kenyans were consulted, and they made their representation before the committee on what they feel have been some of the gaps. So through that, the bill focuses on various issues that were raised and hopes to make those amendments in order to have a sort of more cohesive society, and to strengthen devolution, to address issues of corruption, to increase productivity, and there was also an issue around shared prosperity. So that's the main objective as stated and within the bill itself. So going now to what we are going to be discussing here today is, though I've stated that we've looked at the amendments it's proposing to the entire Constitution, we thought that we should start today with a discussion on Chapter 8, the amendments that have been proposed on Chapter 8 of the Constitution. And that's because earlier a few days ago, some of my colleagues had a tweet chat. So we've been having a series of online discussions, and tweet chats on different topics. So earlier this week, three of my colleagues had tweet chat, basically trying to create or raise awareness on the amendments proposed by Chapter 8, and we had requests to actually have this as a discussion and put together a webinar. So we'll start with Chapter 8, but we will have a series of meetings to basically, again, share our insights on analysis of the entire on amendments to the entire constitution. So next week, so this is the first webinar that we're having, and it's going to look at the cost. Basically, what are the amendments in the Constitution of Kenya Amendment Bill that have been in, as we all may know, is on the legislature. So we will start with that, and then beyond looking at what those amendments are, we are going to also discuss the cost of implementing those amendments. So we have 2 presentations, but we will have 3 of my colleagues do the presentation. The first part of the presentation will look at broadly what exactly are the amendments in what we call here at IEA's CAB II. So I think in case any of my colleagues speak about CAB II, it's the Constitution of Kenya Amendment Bill. So it's the second version. We had the first version. So what my first colleague, Leo Kemboy, who is an assistant program officer in the Law and Economy program, will take us through what the specific amendments are and what they mean. And then we will have a second part of the presentation, which will be done by my colleague Maureen, on changes in representation. And then the last part of this presentation will be done by my colleague Anna Grace. She will then discuss the cost implications of those amendments. Then I'll open up for plenary, the discussion for plenary, but you can still note down your questions as we go, and we will try and see how to address them. Then after plenary, we will have Kwame Owino, who will come in and do the summary and closing. So thank you very much for joining us. And now we'll just go into the first part of the presentation. I'll invite my colleague Leo to take us through the first part of the presentation. Welcome, Leo.
Good morning, everyone. So let me load up my presentation. So, as Jackie has, and my name is Leo Kemboy. I work at the IEA as the Assistant Program Officer in charge of for the Constitution, Law and Economy program. So I'm going to discuss the Chapter 8, the amendments to Chapter 8. And by this I mean the amendments from Article 93 all the way to 128. So I look at the introduction, the amendments, and then the conclusion. What are my insights from the amendments? Now, as you all know, Kenya is as a bicameral legislature. By this, I mean that it has 2 houses. So the National Assembly and the Senate. So they exercise the sovereign power from the Article 3A of the Constitution of Kenya 2010, and then the mandate of Parliament, what Parliament is supposed to do, and by Parliament we mean both houses, is spelled out in 94, while the functions of National Assembly and the Senate is set out in Article 95 and 96. So that's just a brief introduction. And so in the Constitutional Amendment Bill, version 2, 2010, 2020, the one that was tabled before the county assemblies, the one that was handed to the IBC, and the one that is being debated now. The amendments on the legislature start from clause 12. So clause 12, and so the first clause is to amend the Article 96.3 on the functions of the Senate, to extend the mandate of the Senate to have oversight over county council's revenue, borrowings, and expenditures. So in this case, at present, the Article 96 only mandates the Senate to oversight the national revenue, but in principle, so that the Constitutional Amendment Bill 2020 puts the exact wording to expand that mandate of the Senate to deal with the issue of on-source revenue, borrowings, and also the expenditures. The next clause, clause 13, amends Article 97. Article 97, now it changes the composition. This is the composition of the National Assembly. So it brings up, at present, the composition of National Assembly is that it's 290 members, you have plus 47 women reps, and then another set of nominated members, bringing the total number to 349. For this case, it retains the same number of constituencies, but introduces 70 multiple member constituencies, bringing the number to 360. And then there will be nomination of 6 members, 2 being the nomination for the category for youth, 1 man, 1 woman, and then 4 representing persons with disabilities, 2 men, 2 women. So bringing the total number to 366. Also, the Constitution the Constitution Amendment Bill 2020 proposes that there shall be special seats, which the consideration is given to candidates who've already vied, and this is to tackle the gender equity provision, Article 27.8, that requires that 2/3 of either gender in elective or appointive positions. So, and these special seats, now those nominations will be done after the election, and so that to ensure that my colleagues will have done a simulation about this and will explain further on those numbers. So it's important to mention, and I think most people have not, this argument has not come to the public debate, that these special seats have a sunset clause for the next 3 general elections. And as we all know from the chapter on elections, that this was 15 years. So clause 14 amends Article 98. Article 98 talks about the composition of the Senate. Clause 14 changes it changes the composition of the Senate to 1 man, 1 woman per county. So bringing the total number of senators to 94. This one is a very progressive amendment, because it aims to achieve the gender parity, and so the Senate will be that equity. It will be 50% of either gender. And now the implication is that it expands the size of the Senate by 40%. So from the current number of senators, 67, to 94. The next clause is clause 15. Clause 15 amends Article 99, 2A and D. And now this clause, Article 99 speaks about the qualifications of a member of parliament. And now this, the members of county assembly, the 2010 constitution bars members of county assembly. Because if you read the Article 99, it requires, Article 99 is that unless disqualified, a person is eligible for election as a member of parliament. For 2A is a state officer or other public officer other than a member of parliament. So in essence, it bars MCs from vying as members of parliament. D speaks about, it bars them specifically as a member if they are disqualified is a member of county assembly. So I think this is also another progressive because it brings that aspect of fairness. Clause 16 adds Article 107A, bringing in the position of the leader of official opposition. And now the leader of this was in the previous constitution before 2010, that the leader of official opposition is the person with the second highest number of votes in a presidential election, and also that the leader of official opposition must have at least 25% of all members of parliament. They shall not come from the same political party as the prime minister. So, as we all know, I think this is the most popular thing, that one of the most popular amendments that from the Constitutional Amendment Bill 2020, that most of the people know that the position of the PM is being brought back into the Constitution. Clause 17 repeals Article 108, and Article 108 is to recognize the order of precedence in National Assembly, and to recognize now, because the leader of official opposition and the prime minister will be in the National Assembly, so it will be the speaker, then to the prime minister, then to the leader of official opposition. Clause 18 adds 108. This is a new amendment. Immediately 108A, immediately after 108, and recognizes the Senate leadership and lists the order of presidents in the Senate. As we all know, the 2010 Constitution only recognizes the presidents in the National Assembly, but in the Senate it didn't recognize the order of presidents in the Senate. So this provision from the Constitutional Amendment Bill 2020 recognizes the order of presidents in the Senate. Clause 19. So Clause 19 amends Article 113.3. Article 113.3 refers to now the functions of Parliament, and this is on mediation bills referred to mediation committee. So it lengthens the period of the originating house to refer the bill to the president from 7 days to 14 days. In the previous amendment, in the 2010 Constitution, it says the Speaker of National Assembly is the one that is supposed to refer a mediation bill to the president. But this one brings the equality, because these are both houses. Because if the originating house in any case is the Senate, the bill should move. Once the bill has been agreed, the bill has been passed by both houses, the bill should be referred to the president for assent by the Speaker of that house that originated the bill. So this one brings equality between both houses of Parliament. So the amendment here, the most important thing to note, the amendment here is that originating house. So it deletes National Assembly. Clause 20 amends Article 115 4B. So removes voting through delegations in the Senate. As noted under the amendment in Article 98, that the Senate is being expanded to 94 members, and there will be no nominated members to the Senate. So this means that there will be no voting through delegations, which is normally the current practice. So, and likewise, Clause 21, it repeals Article 123, which detailed how the delegations in the Senate are constituted, and the voting mechanism. So those are amendments. So those are amendments to the Chapter 8. The most, for me, there are two amendments that come into there are two conclusions that I derive from this. The first one is that very clearly it removes the doctrine of separation of powers between now the executive and parliament, because it means that because from the amendments we know that the members of executive, the members of executive, like cabinet ministers, even the members of parliament will be chosen as cabinet ministers, and also members who are not cabinet ministers who are not members of parliament will sit also in parliament. So it removes the question of separation of powers, and this is important because the three arms of government are supposed to provide checks and balances. At present, Parliament has powers to the purse, which is the budget making powers, and also has powers to impose taxes. Parliament, they're the ones who have powers to make laws, and if members of executive are going to sit in parliament, it's important to know whether the question of doctrine, the separation of powers between the two arms of government is an important question. And as an economist myself, I think that any state is very powerful, and the only way that the executive is always watered, the powers of the executive are always watered down, is through parliament, because that check, and this is the global practice, that the two arms of government need to be separate. The second amendment, the second conclusion from this is that it expands the size of parliament. My colleagues would speak more into this. I think on a normal basis, at least 57% for the National Assembly and 40% for the Senate. So, as an economist, that is not the problem. The problem is if that expansion will translate to efficiency of Parliament in discharging its mandate. That is the most important question, because what we believe is there is always an opportunity cost. And if you make one decision, and the transaction cost is, for example, in this case, is to expand the size of Parliament, if that transaction cost is smaller than the benefit that will be attained, then that is a good trade-off. That's an efficient trade-off, and but if that transaction cost, which is, for example, in this case, the expansion of Parliament, does not translate to efficiency of Parliament in discharging its mandate, then that's a bad trade-off. So those are two bigger points that I picked from this. Thank you. Back to you, Jackie.
Thank you. Thanks a lot, Leo, for that presentation. So Leo has taken us through the main provisions of the amendment bill in terms of the functions, legislature, what the amendment bill, the various amendments, what they portend in terms of the functions of the legislature, what changes we will see, and he's helped us understand some of the implications that would result from those amendments in terms of efficiency in the running of the House and in the powers and mandate of the House, as well as implications for separation of powers, in his opinion. So the second part of our presentation today, we go into the second presentation. As I had mentioned earlier, we'll have two of my colleagues, our research officers, share with us specific amendments in terms of the cost implications of these amendments. So Maureen will go first. Maureen will discuss what amendments to Chapter 97 Chapter Clause 97 as well as 98, which both speak on composition of the National Assembly as well as composition of the Senate. Once she does that, then we'll have my colleague Anna Grace, who will then discuss with us what we see as best or worst case scenarios in terms of if those amendments were to be passed as they are, what would be the best and what it would mean in terms of costs, looking at the best case scenario and worst case scenario. So Maureen, you're welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, Jackie. Okay, so as my colleague Leo has summarized on Clause 13 of Article 97 of the Constitution that's being amended by deleting the words 200 and substituting it with the word 360, which means the 290 members of the National Assembly will be increased to 360 members, and deleting paragraph B and substituting it with the new paragraph 4 members, being 2 women and 2 men representing persons with disabilities and 2 members representing the youth. And also there's the provision of the special seats members, which is a sunset clause, as my colleague Leo has explained. It's meant to end after 3 general elections from the commencement dates. We also have the leader of the opposition, the Attorney General, and the cabinet ministers will be sitting in the parliament. Looking at table 1, we see that there are special seats which are created to implement the 2/3 gender rule as proposed in the Constitution Amendment bills. And the BBI will expand the total National Assembly members by 49% from 349 to a possible 521. And this costs the taxpayer additional cost, as my colleague Anna will explain later on. How we came to the number 155 members in the National Assembly on the special seats. The proposed number in the Constitution Amendment Bill is 360 members, and we have the 6 nominated members from the people with disabilities and the youth, and half of them will be women. And Parliament consists of the National Assembly and the Senate. So we are adding up both numbers from the Senate and the National Assembly, and half of members from the National Assembly from the Senate will be women, because we'll have to elect 1 man and 1 woman from each county to represent the Senate. So 47 of them will be women, and 3 members from the nominated members will be 3 members from also be from one gender, either men or women. So that comes to 50. And so you have 363 members plus from elected members, if we assume it's from one gender, and the 47 members from of the parliament, which is the requirements. And so to add up the a third of the parliament, which becomes 205, that forms the whole 615 members. From the 205, which will be one gender, and removing the nominated members, which we set aside as 50, that's how we come up to 5 members. Next, to look at the composition of the Senate. The composition of the Senate increases the elected members from 47 to 94 in the proposed Constitution Amendment Bill. There will be one representative, one man and one woman per county to implement the two-third gender rule, which will be already implemented in that. And we see that the proposed changes in the Constitution Amendment Bill will increase the total composition of the Senate from 67 to 94, that's 40%. That will increase the members by 27 members. Looking at table 3, it shows the best and worst case scenarios depending on the number of minority gender elected. And the size of the National Assembly, then the size of the Parliament of the National Assembly ranges from 366 in the best case scenario and 521 in the worst case scenario, as I explained before. On the next table is the current estimates of monthly salaries and benefits received by each legislature per month as approved by the Salaries and Remuneration Commission. Here we see that the average monthly salary and benefits that the legislatures in both the National Assembly and the Senate receive is 1.375 million per month. And the other allowances and benefits have been we've placed them as on another set because they're not given monthly as compared to the other wages. And the committee sitting allowance, we found a range from 80 to 128,000, where the chairperson of the committee is the one who receives 128,000, while the other members who are allowed to sit at least in 2 parliamentary commissions, in 2 parliamentary committees, they receive at least 80,000 per month. Yeah. I'll let my colleague Anna Grace.
Good morning. My name is Anna Grace, and I'll take you through table 5 through 7. And before we move on, I'd just like you to remember this figure, 1.375 million, which is a very conservative estimate of the monthly salary and benefits of the legislators. But that's what we'll use now to build up the scenarios, both in the best case and the worst case. By best case, we mean a situation where in the election, there's already achieved the 2/3 gender rule through the elected members, and therefore there is no need to have the provision for the special seats. So, table 5, here we're just looking at, okay, so in the best case scenario, we've said that the total size of parliament would be 615 members, and in the best case, it's 460 members, and in the worst case, it's 615 members. But as is right now, parliament is both the National Assembly and the Senate, 349 and 67 members, respectively, adding up to 416. So let's look at the first case where now all the 360 members of the National Assembly who are elected are belonging to one gender. So now there has to be the provision of the special seats to meet the 2/3 gender rule. That means that now Parliament in total would constitute 615 members, and that's an additional 199 from the 416. Going back to the 1.375 million, if you multiply 199 by 1.375, you get 273.65 million Kenya shillings per month. And in the best case scenario, where there's no need for the special seats, Parliament would constitute of 460 members. This is both National Assembly and the Senate, and that's an additional 44 members from the 416. So again, multiplying this 44 by the 1.375 million gives you 60.5 million. So this 273 million and 60 million are what we're going to use now to just break it down and see the implication of the additional members, looking at our tax collection and per capita. If everyone was to pay the legislators, how much would that be per day and by month? So that takes us to our next slide, which is additional tax effects. So again, looking at the two cases, the worst case scenario and the best case scenario. The worst case, we had an additional monthly cost of 273 million. And looking at our ordinary revenue, here we use 2019-2020 financial year figures. Ordinary revenue throughout the whole year collected was 1.573 trillion. So we break that down to a monthly basis, which means basically dividing that number by 12. And then that figure is what we use to get 0.209%. So as a proportion of ordinary revenue means this 273 million divide by the ordinary revenue by month, and you get 0.209%, which means for every 100 shillings of ordinary revenue collected, about 21 cents goes towards paying the additional monthly costs of these additional legislators. I hope we're together. And if you look at the best case scenario, where we had an additional 60.5 million Kenya shillings, again, dividing that 60.5 by the ordinary revenue collected per month, you get 0.046%. Which means for every 100 shillings of ordinary revenue collected, about 5 cents would go towards paying the additional monthly costs of the additional legislators. So that's just the picture looking at ordinary revenue collection. Now, in the last column, we have this additional monthly cost as a proportion of payee. So payee is the personal income tax collected. And again, looking at the 2019-2020 figures, that was around 0.4 trillion throughout the year. Again, we break that down to a monthly basis, which is basically dividing the 0.4 trillion by 12. And then now we do the 273 million divided by the pay collected per month, and you get 0.82%. We did the same for the best case scenario, which was 60.5 million divided by the monthly pay collected, you get 0.182. Again, I interpret this as for every 100 shillings of pay collected, 82 cents would go towards paying the additional monthly cost in the worst case scenario. For every 100 shillings of pay collected, 18 cents would go towards paying the additional monthly cost in the best case scenario. Yes. We move on to the next slide, which is now looking at this additional monthly costs and how heavy would that weigh on the citizens of Kenya. And here we're looking at the population of Kenya being 47.6 million Kenyans.
Good luck.
And we just break this down again. So the additional monthly costs in the worst case scenario were 273 million. And then we divide that by the 47.6 million, and we get that if every citizen was to pay the additional monthly cost, it would mean every month each citizen would pay 5 shillings and 75 cents towards the additional monthly costs. in the worst case scenario. But in the best case scenario, it's the 60.5 million divided by the 47.6 million Kenyans, which would give us each Kenyan would pay 1.27 shillings towards the additional monthly costs. And then again, just breaking it down to a daily figure to give it perspective. So if every citizen was to pay some portion of their income towards meeting this monthly cost, it would mean every day you and I would each pay 19 cents to meeting the additional costs in the worst case scenario, and in the best case scenario we'd be paying 4 cents. Yeah. So as we conclude, we realized that some Kenyans are not getting the cost implication. And what do I mean by this? Some people were just directly multiplying Parliament's budget. I mean, dividing the budget, which is around 39 billion, by the number of legislators currently, which is 416. And then they say that now if you add, I don't know, like the 155 legislators, you just multiply that figure by the 155, and now we'll see how much more we'd be paying to maintain this additional legislators. But that's not the true picture, because we all know that Parliament in its daily running, or even just as an institution, has some fixed costs, like the cost of the speakers and even just the staff and everything else that goes towards keeping Parliament running every day is on top of the remuneration package of the. Why we had to break it down for you to see on the lower end how much are we saying each MP and each senator would cost us, and our estimate is about 1.375 million per month. And on top of that, again, on the breakdown, let me just go back to that slide where we had on table 4, we have the wages of the legislators around 710,000, which you can see as a proportion of this estimate of 1.375 million is almost 50%. So we're saying that the allowances constitute half of their remuneration. Therefore, the question we should be asking is not really how many people are we adding, but how much would it cost us? And that cost is dependent on the package you have. So if you have 50% of the remuneration being allowances, then that means that every single additional legislator you'll add, you'd be paying half of the benefits in terms of allowances. So I think there needs to be a restructuring of the remuneration package. Then now we could start talking about the numbers. But all in all, that was our presentation on the cost implication of the additional seats or of BBI's proposals on Chapter 8 of the Constitution of Kenya. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks, Anna, and thanks, Maureen, for the second part of the presentation. Samuel, I'll request you to kindly turn off your video, Samuel Murage, because this session is being recorded. Thanks to my 3 colleagues for sharing with us their interpretation of what the amendments in the Constitution of Kenya Amendment Bill, the second version, mean in terms of changes to the legislature. So now I'll open up the session to plenary. So the second part, I think I summarized the first part, but the second part of the presentation basically helped us see what those numbers would be in terms of the best case scenario if after the elections we had all the different categories of groups elected to meet the constitutional threshold, the 2/3 gender rule, that they provided us with the numbers for the best case scenario. And if none were elected, we got the numbers for worst case scenario, what the amendments mean in terms of adding additional seats in order to meet that. And so the figures that have been presented here in terms of the cost implications are on the lowest end and the highest end. We could have anything in between there. And I think we've seen that on the highest end, what we are saying for the legislature is that it will cost us an additional 273.6 million monthly in the worst case scenario, or an additional 60.5 million in the best case scenario, if at all the bill is passed. We go to a referendum and that bill is passed as is. So then I will not recap all the other interpretations in terms of what it means in terms of what percentage goes to the what that looks like in terms of looking at the percentage of ordinary revenues and the per capita payments per month and per year, because I think it was pretty clear in the presentation. So I'll invite now you, if you have any question to any of our presenters, you can raise your hand. If you look at this platform, there's a provision for you to raise your hand if you'd like to voice your question, or you could type it in the question box, and we will try and respond to you. Anyone with a question, kindly raise your hand, and I will be able to see you. As I wait for some questions, let me see what is on the question box. I see Joshua Momani had asked, please translate the sunset clause about the special nominations to meet the 2/3 gender rule that expires after 3 general elections. What is projected to have happened by then in terms of elective politics as it relates to the 2/3 gender rule? What if the gender rule is not met after the election? What then will happen? Leo, would you like to respond to that? Okay, so that's the first question, which we're going to respond to you shortly. Then the second part is thank you. There's another question on thank you, IEA, for the useful webinar. Have you factored in the cost of support staff allowed for each representative? In your view, would this spike the cost as presented? So we have those two questions. Leo, are you able to respond to the first?
Yes. So my perspective about this is that so long as the constitutional principle in Article 27 is still standing, and that one has not been amended, even if the sunset clause for that purpose ends, still Parliament will have to, after 15 years, Parliament will still have to be compliant with the 2/3 gender rule. It will not preclude that one, because if you read in Article 259 that this constitution must be read in a way that the Kenyan constitution must be read in a way that it promotes the rule of law, democracy, and generally, they'll still have to comply. So that's my perspective about the special seats. So even if that sunset clause ends, Parliament at that time will still have to comply. Whether the elective politics will have changed, whether you'll be able to, in a way, have complied with that by design, still, do not change much.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Leo. So basically what he's saying, and which I agree with, is if in any case, if after 15 years we will not have met that requirement, well, that clause will expire by design, but it will mean that we would then again have to look at what further affirmative actions can to bridge it, because we would not have complied. So it would mean trying thinking about some further amendments to again try and implement it. But in most countries, comparatively, that have done this or that have had this affirmative action clause, in most cases, it allows for more the underrepresented group to actually be able to participate more, and usually it brings in more of the numbers. I would not think it would be necessary, but if that did happen, then it would mean new amendments. So the second part of the other question that I see here was a question, I think, to Maureen and Anna: have we factored in the cost of support staff and for each representative? And in our view, would this in any way spike the cost as presented? Maureen, Anna, would any of you like to respond to this?
Hello, Jackie. This is Anna Grace. I'd like to say our estimate was very conservative. Again, we didn't go into the nitty-gritty of support staff and the cars and everything. We just had basic salary. There was a salary, there was the wage, the committee sitting allowance, the responsibility allowance, mileage allowance, and airtime allowance. There are other allowances and other costs that go into supporting one single legislator. But as for now, our estimate just had 1.275 million per legislator. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks, Anna. There's a further question. Kindly take us through how you arrived at 155 for the special seats, and what is the probability of that happening?
How we arrived at, okay, thank you, Jackie. How we arrived at 155, we looked at the clause that said we are deleting 290 with 360. That means the members of the National Assembly will increase from 290 to 360. And there's also the clause that the special seat clause that involves the two-thirds gender rule in both houses, the Parliament and the Senate. And the Senate is increasing from 47 to 94, meaning there'll be an additional of 47 members, 1 man and 1 woman per county. So it will be 47 men and 47 women senators. So the 360 also have the 6 nominated members, from which will have half of the members being men and half of the members being women. So we took 363 being the elected 360 and the 3 nominated. We assumed it's from one gender, and then we have the 3 left from the other gender. Then we have the 47 from one gender from the Senate, that makes 50. Then we have 363 plus 47 from one elected gender. Then we'll have 410 members who are elected, assuming it. Okay, that's the worst case scenario where we'll have 410 members. Then that makes 2/3 of the Parliament. So finding the whole number, which is 1, it becomes 615. If you less 410 from 615, you get 205. And we had 3 nominated members from the National Assembly and 47 members from the Senate, which will make 50 members elected from the Senate and then nominated from the National Assembly. So leaving it from the 205, if we less 50, we'll have 155 for the special seat. That's how we came up with the 155 members for the special seat. Thank you. I hope that answers your question.
Thanks, Maureen. I think it does, unless they'd like any further clarification. So basically how we arrived at that is looking at clause 13. Clause 13 of the amendment bill has proposed those changes, and then we calculated the best and worst case scenarios, as she has explained. So there's a follow-up question by Joshua. As a follow-up to the special seat issue, why are you combining the gender numbers from the two houses, the National Assembly and the Senate? Yet they both need to comply independently.
Okay, we are combining both numbers because in the Constitution, the COK 2010, it states that the Parliament consists of both the National Assembly and the Senate, and the clause on the number of special seats, it states that the number of special seats members necessary to ensure that no more than 2/3 of the membership of Parliament are of the same gender. So looking at the Parliament, you're looking at both houses, the Senate and the National Assembly. Yeah, thank you.
Absolutely, thank you. Thanks, Maureen. Yes, as Leo started by mentioning earlier, is that we have a bicameral Parliament. So looking at its composition, we have to consider both. Yes, there's a requirement for both of the houses to comply, and that's precisely why we have to look at the numbers for both houses. So I see another question here by Kennedy. I think the real cost is within support staff members, PDMs. We should include security officers. Since this information is available, you could single out one MPs and senators serving in the current Parliament and find out what it costs to sustain him or her and undertake an average as a working figure. I'll ask my colleagues to comment on this, but I think the numbers that we provided today was basically trying to look at scenarios based on the current actual amounts for each member of Parliament in terms of their salaries and their allowances. Yes, we did not include their support staff, which may mean an additional cost, but I'll ask that. I mean, I think it's something that we can consider and try and provide those scenarios as well. But I'll ask Anna, do you have any thoughts on this? Anna or Maureen?
We appreciate your suggestion to include support staff members and the PDMs. Maybe that would be done in follow-up research. This was quick figures and from the SRC Gazette notices, but we'll dig in more to find out the cost per legislator, including all these other smaller costs. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Anna. I see another question. There was a hand up. No, it's gone back down. So I see another question here. If the Senate complies and the National Assembly doesn't, could we say that we have complied with the rule? Okay. Absolutely, I do not think so. I think for as long as Parliament, then the numbers, the 2/3 gender rule has not been met by, in my view, that is, if it has not been met by both houses, then I do not think that it would mean compliance. It may be something that would require maybe further interpretation by the court. The court could find one way or the other. But in my view, given that both houses make up Parliament as a whole, I do not think that one house complying would mean that we've complied with the rule. I'll ask if my colleagues have any different thoughts, then maybe they could add, but I'll also ask Kwame to note that and maybe add his thoughts when in his summary remarks. Does anyone else have a question? Anyone who would like to? Paul Mukunzi, I see your hand up. Would you like to unmute and ask?
Yes, good morning.
Morning.
Yes, I think thank you for the very good presentations made. Just wanted to make one or two comments. One is on the costs. I felt maybe also that there would be need to look at some benchmarks of these costs which you gave us. The per unit cost, especially benchmarking against probably either countries at similar stages of development or countries we would aspire to be at the same level. So that could also maybe eliminate and guide us a bit better in terms of what do these costs mean vis-a-vis similar countries. And then number two is for the scenarios you gave, which is best case and worst case. Obviously, we would expect that this case would be somewhere in between the best and worst, and probably also it would be good to try and see, given the voting patterns we've seen in the past, what is a more likely scenario which is in between there. For example, what would we expect to have? What number of nominations would we expect to have, given what you've seen in the past? Yeah, so basically, those are the two comments I had to make.
All right, thank you. Thanks, Paul. We take note of your suggestions. It's something that we can do to improve on the research, or to just give additional information. The proposal on benchmarking against other countries, we've noted that. And then the second part, I think, was also just some additional comments. So thanks for those suggestions. As before I invite Kwame, I'll ask Leo and Maureen and Anna to make any final remarks that they have, if they have any additional thoughts. Then before I go to Kwame. So I'll start with Anna. Anna, might you have any closing remarks or any additional thoughts?
I'd just like to say thank you for the suggestions to improve our research further. We'll definitely look into them and get a more detailed picture of the cost implications that BBI is proposing. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Anna. Maureen, any final words?
Okay, thank you. I'd just like to note, whatever my colleague Anna said on the numbers not being the problem, which people are looking at the BBI as the numbers being the problem, but the remuneration structure is the problem here. And thank you for the suggestions as well. We'll provide more research. Thank you.
Thanks, Maureen. Leo, any additional or closing remarks you might have?
Yeah. For me, the biggest worry is from working with Parliament and MPs in the past, and looking at the problems that Kenya has now that emanated from Parliament, like, for example, on issues of public finance, the issue of fiscal crisis that we have now, all those other things. My big worry is on the doctrine of separation of powers, whether an hybrid of the executive and legislature being together essentially would mean would be an efficient outcome or not. So that's my closing remark for me.
Thanks a lot. Thanks to the team for putting together that presentation, and thank you all for joining us. In closing, I'm going to invite Kwame. Kwame is the CEO of the IEA to close the forum and give us his summary thoughts. Thank you.
Okay, fine. Thanks a lot, Jackie. Thanks, Leo, Anaji, and Maureen. And thanks, everyone, for attending this. Now, I'd like to just close by answering two questions. The first is, what are our data sources? Because I think that came from how the costing is done. Our data sources, if you look at the presentation available on our website, our data sources are salaries and allowances as approved by the Salaries and Remuneration Commission. So even if you went into more detail, they're likely to be different from what this is. The only factors that we left out are, and I think the media is reporting this wrongly, members of parliament have an allowance for medical allowance equivalent to a medical benefit equivalent to 10 million shillings per year. It doesn't mean that they get paid 10 million shillings. What government pays is the premium that allows you to enjoy a benefit of about 10 million shillings per year, which will come to maybe 200 or 300,000 at the most, compared to, in addition to their families. So those are the factors that we've kept out, and for very obvious reasons. Because they tend to be not single cost, in the sense that a benefit is not the same as what it costs the taxpayer, because what the taxpayer buys for the member of parliament is simply the allowance. We also kept aside because those car loans and mortgage of 20 million, a car loan of I think about 7 million, they're paid back on a 3% rule. So basically, in aggregate terms, they're actually not benefits in the sense that the public does not spend money on them. They're paid back with a 3% interest rate. Now, much lower than market rates, but in the whole, it's as if government lends money and then takes it back on the other side. So if you take those, they more or less like even out. Now, all the data that we have was based on the money, or rather the approvals by the Salaries and Remuneration Commission. So even if we have new members of parliament, their benchmarks and the amount of money they'll spend will be based on that. So that's the first. The second thing is, it's not correct to think that using per diems would actually change these numbers, because per diems are dependent on movement, and the per diem is actually calculated on the side of the Parliamentary Service Commission, which is available only for members when they travel for specific events. So that does not necessarily mean that if members travel away, for instance, that every member gets a per diem. It depends on what number. So the per diem share would actually move, but it's not something that's affected by the number of MPs in sitting. So I think understanding the economics of parliament is something that we at the IEA should make it our responsibility to teach, or rather to create knowledge about, and to actually understand how parliament spends money. Most of parliament has very high fixed costs, which is basically that you will not need a second speaker, you will not need a second clerk, you will not need, a clerk of the National Assembly, you not need a second sergeant at arms and all those other factors, because those are already established. Whether we had a parliament of 300 people or whether we had a parliament of 40 people, that building and its maintenance will be a fixed feature. So what we're trying to say, what we're trying to cost is the additional features. Again, every member will be entitled to security. That's true, but it's not as if parliament has its own police force. What will happen instead is that there'll be a requirement through an arrangement with the Parliamentary Service Commission and the police service to actually provide police officers available, or rather security officers available to these members of parliament. What might happen is actually we might have police officers seconded to parliament to provide security, but it doesn't mean they will necessarily be hired afresh. I think it's important for us to scale this discussion. I know the Kenyan thinking is the additional spending should not be, that's true. But integrity and credibility on the part of the IEA requires us to state the obvious amount so that Kenyans can debate them dispassionately without making it look like we are trying to tip the argument anti or against or for this discussion. So we take this opportunity to make sure that every Kenyan and a citizen understands the cost of a single member of parliament in terms of their remuneration and their wage, and that's what we intended to carry out here. Secondly, so the size of parliament is dependent on two things. The numbers, which is basically your raw numbers in terms of how many people sit in the house, but that's not as much. That does not vary or change the wages as much, or rather the cost to the citizen as much as the benefits that parliamentarians have. So it is possible to have 200 members of parliament with the same benefits as 600, depending on how it is regulated. Because if they continue to pile up, and as you understand what we were saying, all members of parliament have an allowance of 15,000 shillings per month to call, all of them. How a person who wants 700,000 shillings still requests the public to pay them 15,000 shillings. Those are some of the allowances that have been allowed. Those are some of the substances. Those are some of the additional costs that have been allowed that would change the amount the amount of money spent in general about it. So I think our intention is to scale this appropriately and in a responsible way that makes this discussion proceed with caution. I know that members of parliament, of course, have personal assistants. That's true. Each of them is going to hire them. That's true. Again, they are not employees of the MP. They are employees of the Parliamentary Service Commission. What we are trying to scale, please understand our intention. What we are trying to scale and to bring to the public debate is what additional costs in terms of the direct emoluments to members of parliament would come from hiring an additional 155 members of parliament. That is our purpose. Because those numbers are available, they're regulated by the Salaries and Remuneration Commission, and they are gazetted figures for which any of you who requires a reference can get from us and will provide it. So that's the basic intention. If you take that as a given, the 155 would be the worst case scenario. It's absolutely the worst case scenario, which means that the members of the National Assembly would have no women. And what that means then is that in order to comply with the requirements under this law that we cited to you, the Constitutional Amendment Bill 2 that we cited to you, it would mean that all the nominations or special seats would have to be established for 155 women. What we are providing, rather 155 members of the minority gender. I think, again, we must learn that it is not necessarily true that it's women who will be. That's the reality today, but it will be the minority gender, whichever way it ends up. So that we should not argue that these are women's seats, because it could also take to the other side, even if our reality is such that we do not think that would be the case. So remember, our argument is this: the major movement or the major determinants of what the cost would be are not just the wage that a member of parliament takes. Those allowances are very many, and they're replicated, and they more or less overlap with one another in a way that they're far more critical in the determination. So 50% of the wage is what an MP takes, and that's what is subject to taxation. We have not netted out tax, so obviously the cost is even lower if you net out the tax that each member of parliament would pay. But remember, they only pay their tax on their 700,000 shillings, which is a monthly pay. All these allowances are minus taxes, and those allowances are what determines what the additional expenditure is. That's the intention of our discussion today. Finally, this discussion has been discovered in the press. There's an article that quotes the IEA, but fails to mention, which is embarrassing for Kenyan. If all the 360 members of parliament that are of National Assembly that are appointed manage to pass the 2/3 threshold, then there'd be no need. All the way to the worst case scenario, which is 300, it would be an additional 155. So the range could lie somewhere in here. When a headline reads that it's 3 billion shillings additional, without stating the qualifier that it could be anything between 0 to 3 billion, then we obviously understand that the debate has been taken over by the nature, by the quest to grab headlines and to shock Kenyans without necessarily adding understanding or illuminating what this bill provides. That's the critical thing. It's also true. The reason it's 155, I think I need to question this as big, because Jackie asked, the law states that the balance should be in parliament. So what that means is the amendment under the Constitutional Amendment Bill means that at the Senate level, there'll already be a 50-50 rule. There'll be a 50-50 reality, because there'll be 47 women representatives and 47 male. Now, whether there's a third gender that has been occupied there or not is not for us to debate. The assumption is that there'll be two genders, one male, one female. For that reason, the Senate, under this new rule, if it was to pass, would already have complied. But the constitutional requirement is for parliament, not for either house. So what that means is, because Senate will already have 47, there'll be 3 also nominated. De facto, we'll have 50 women in place. Meaning, that the correction would actually have to be for both houses to comply, not one. So it is possible for the Senate to have 50% female representation and the National Assembly to have a little less, but provided the combined number is 33% or less, or more for both houses, then obviously that. So it does not require specific compliance by either house, but the design is such that the Senate will comply by default because of 50-50, and therefore we would simply have to top up numbers at the National Assembly level to ensure that compliance. So thank you very much. I remind you as well that we have another webinar on Wednesday next week, starting from 11 o'clock, to discuss another chapter of the Constitution Amendment Bill. So thank you for sitting with us today and for the questions that you've provided, and I hope that we have provided sufficient illumination and to help with the understanding of Chapter 8. Thank you very much. Jackie, back to you.
All right, thank you. Thanks, Kwame, and thanks, everyone. I don't have anything else to add. I see a question. I only see just one question asking about that. Someone said they didn't see the costs for the Prime Minister. First of all, in our subsequent, we'll explain how the appointment of the Prime Minister will be done, but he'll actually be appointed from amongst the members of Parliament. So from the party that will have majority representatives within Parliament, then the head of that party will be appointed as Prime Minister. But that those details will be provided in our next webinar. So the cost is already within this, unless there will be obviously any additional benefits to that office. So as Kwame has said, we welcome you to our next webinar, which will be on Wednesday next week, where we'll be discussing 2 more chapters, including the chapter on the executive and the judiciary. So thanks again, everyone, and have a good day. Bye.